Rachel Anderson arrived at her aunt's countryside home with a single suitcase and a tired heart. After a long, messy breakup and endless noise from city life, she just wanted peace. The road leading to the house was lined with tall oaks and glowing wildflowers. And for the first time in months, she felt she could breathe again. Her aunt, a cheerful woman who ran a small flower farm, hugged her tightly and said she was glad Rachel had come. But within an hour, her aunt was already rushing around packing for a 2-week family trip she couldn't cancel. "Ethan will be here to help with the animals," her aunt said while loading bags into the car. "He's been staying here to take care of things. He'll be fine." Rachel nodded politely, pretending not to care who Ethan was. But when he walked out from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth, her heart gave a small, surprised jump. He was tall, tanned from the sun, with steady blue eyes and a quiet expression. He smiled in a way that felt both friendly and distant, like someone who had learned to stay calm no matter what life threw at him. "Hey," he said simply, "you must be Rachel." "Yeah," she replied, trying not to sound nervous. After her aunt's car disappeared down the dirt road, the silence around the farmhouse felt thick. No traffic, no city sounds, just wind, the creak of trees, and the distant call of birds. Ethan leaned against the porch rail and said, "Guess it's just the two of us then." Rachel gave a small laugh, unsure what else to say. That evening, the house felt both too big and too quiet. Rachel unpacked, walked around the place, and tried to settle in. She found Ethan fixing the railing outside, his sleeves rolled up, focused and patient. Something about him drew her attention, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the quiet pull of curiosity. He barely looked up, just said, "You can grab dinner from the kitchen if you're hungry. I made some pasta earlier." That surprised her. "You cook?" she asked. "Only when no one else wants to starve," he said with a faint smile. Later, they ate together at this small wooden table, surrounded by the soft hum of night. Rachel noticed the way the lantern light caught the curve of his jaw, the calm rhythm in how he spoke. Ethan asked her about the city, about what brought her there, and she admitted she just needed time to think. He didn't press her for details, and that small kindness made her like him more. When thunder rolled in the distance, they decided to light a fire. The rain began softly at first, then heavier, filling the air with the smell of wet earth. They sat by the fireplace, the glow lighting their faces, and talked about simple things books, favorite songs, small childhood memories. Ethan wasn't one for many words, but when he spoke, it felt like every sentence meant something. Rachel found herself opening up, telling him things she hadn't said to anyone else in months. "I used to paint," she said softly, "but I stopped after. Well, after things fell apart." "Maybe you should start again," he said. "Some things come back when we let them." The way he said it made her look at him longer than she should have. There was no flirtation, no rushed, just quiet honesty. The fire popped, and outside the rain grew heavier. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, and only the two of them existed in that warm, golden space. Ethan stood up to check the windows, and Rachel followed, unsure why. They ended up standing close near the window, both staring out at the storm. Lightning flashed, and for a second, she saw their reflections to people from different worlds, somehow standing side by side. When their eyes met, something passed between them. It wasn't love yet, not even desire, just recognition. A spark of understanding. The kind that happens when two people who've both been hurt find a little comfort in each other's company. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," she said, though her voice came out softer than she intended. He smiled and went back to the fireplace, adding another log. Rachel sat down again, pretending to warm her hands, but her thoughts were far away. She couldn't explain the feeling, but it was there, steady, silent, growing stronger. They didn't talk much after that. Ethan read a book. Rachel watched the fire. The storm outside kept them trapped together, and somehow she didn't mind. The sound of rain, the flicker of the fire, the calm breathing of another person, all felt safe, familiar, like she had finally found a place where she didn't have to pretend she was okay. Later that night, when she went to her room, she paused by the doorway and looked back. Ethan was still by the fire, lost in thought. The soft light brushed against his face, and Rachel felt a quiet ache inside her chest. She didn't know what it was or where it would lead, but she knew something had started that evening, something she hadn't expected to feel again. Lying in bed, she could still hear the rain tapping on the window, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The silence of the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive, humming with unspoken thoughts. She turned over, trying to sleep, but her mind replayed every look, every word, every quiet moment between them. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The storm was gone, but the memory of last night lingered like perfume in the air. Rachel went downstairs and found Ethan already awake, making coffee. He handed her a cup without a word, and their fingers brushed for a second. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. She smiled. "Thanks. Morning," he said, as if the world hadn't shifted between them. But Rachel felt it. Deep down, she knew that something had changed forever. And as she looked out the window at the drenched fields and clear blue sky, she couldn't help but wonder what the next 2 weeks would bring now that it was just the two of them, and the quiet house that seemed to breathe with their every heartbeat. The summer had only just begun, but Rachel already sensed it. The peace she came looking for wasn't the only thing she was about to find. The next few days moved quietly, like pages turning in an old book. Rachel found herself settling into a slow, peaceful rhythm at her aunt's countryside home. Mornings began with the sound of birds, the smell of coffee, and Ethan already outside tending to the animals. He worked hard, but never made a big deal of it. Rachel often watched him from the porch, his calm focus almost comforting. Soon, helping him became part of her daily routine. She fed the chickens, carried hay, and learned how to brush the horses. The first time she tried, she accidentally dropped the brush into the mud. Ethan laughed a soft, genuine laugh that surprised her. "You're a city girl through and through," he teased gently. She rolled her eyes. "Maybe, but I'm learning." "Yeah," he said, still smiling. "You're doing just fine." Little by little, the awkwardness between them faded. Their conversations grew longer. He told her stories about the farm, about losing his parents young, and how he'd found peace working with animals instead of people. Rachel shared how the city had worn her down, how she'd lost herself in a relationship that ended badly. There was no judgment, no pity, just quiet understanding. Every night, they'd sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the fields orange and gold. It became their unspoken routine. They didn't need to say much. The silence between them was comfortable, not heavy. Rachel felt lighter with each passing day, like the countryside was slowly washing away the sadness she'd carried for so long. Then came the storm. It started in the afternoon, a low rumble of thunder, a shift in the wind. By evening, the sky turned gray and heavy, and the first drops of rain hit the porch roof like tiny drums. Ethan hurried outside to pull in tools and cover the hay bales. Rachel followed, helping him carry buckets and shut the barn doors. The wind whipped her hair across her face and rain soaked her shirt, but she couldn't stop laughing. Ethan grinned at her through the downpour. "You're going to catch a cold," he shouted. "So will you?" She yelled back. They ran for cover, slamming the barn doors just as the rain came down in sheets. Inside, it was dim and warm. The air smelled like hay and rain. For a moment, they both stood there, catching their breath, faces flushed from running. Their eyes met, and Rachel felt something stir in her chest, an invisible pull she couldn't explain. Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should wait it out here," he said. "Yeah," Rachel murmured, brushing wet hair from her face. The sound of rain filled the space, soft and steady. Ethan found an old lantern, lit it, and placed it on a crate between them. Its warm glow flickered over their faces. Rachel sat down, hugging her knees, while Ethan leaned against a wooden post. The silence was peaceful, but beneath it, something new was forming, gentle, uncertain, but undeniably real. After a while, he said quietly, "You seem different this week." "Happier." "Guess I am," she replied. "It's strange. I thought I came here to be alone, but—" She stopped herself. "But you're not alone anymore." He finished for her. Their eyes met again. Neither spoke after that. The moment was simple, but it carried a weight that neither could ignore. When the storm began to calm, thunder fading into the distance, Ethan stood and opened the barn doors slightly. The world outside was dark but peaceful. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and fireflies danced over the wet grass. Rachel stepped up beside him, their shoulders brushing lightly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," he said softly, though he was looking at her, not the view. They stood there like that, side by side, watching the night. No words, no plans, just quiet closeness. Rachel felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the weather. She had felt broken for so long, but here, in this quiet corner of the world, with this man who barely spoke but always listened, something inside her was healing. When they finally returned to the house, the power was out. Ethan found candles and placed them around the living room, their flickering light filling the space with calm. Rachel wrapped herself in a blanket, still shivering from the cold. Ethan brought her a cup of tea and sat across from her. "Thanks," she said, taking it from him. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice low and kind. The storm outside grew distant, just a soft hum now. They talked again, more openly than ever, about how hard it is to start over, how lonely healing can feel. Ethan listened without interrupting, and when he did speak, his words were simple but full of meaning. Sometimes, he said, the right people walk into your life when you've stopped expecting anyone to show up. Rachel looked at him, the candlelight glowing in his eyes, and her chest tightened. For a second, she wanted to say something, to tell him that maybe he was one of those people, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just smiled. A small, quiet smile that said everything. Then lightning flashed again, briefly lighting up the room, followed by a soft rumble of thunder. Rachel jumped a little, and Ethan laughed gently. "You still scared of storms?" "Only when they're loud," she admitted. He moved closer, not touching her, just sitting beside her on the couch. "You're safe here," he said. Something about those words hit deeper than he probably meant them to. Safe. That was exactly how she felt with him, safe to be herself. Safe to laugh again, safe to feel something new. They stayed up late that night, talking and laughing softly until the candles burned low. When Rachel finally stood to go to bed, she hesitated at the doorway. "Good night, Ethan," she said. He nodded. "Good night, Rachel." But even as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, and she knew she wouldn't sleep easily. Something had shifted between them. It wasn't love yet, it was something quieter, something waiting. The next morning, the world looked washed clean. The sun rose bright over the fields, sparkling on every drop of rain still clinging to the leaves. Rachel stepped outside and breathed deeply. The air was fresh and cool. Ethan was already by the fence, fixing a loose wire, and when he saw her, he smiled. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. Their voices were light. Casual, but the look they shared wasn't. It said everything their words didn't. Something had started last night. Something small but impossible to ignore. As the day went on, they returned to their usual rhythm work, laughter. Shared meals, but underneath it all was a new tension. Not heavy or uncomfortable, but electric. Every glance felt charged. Every smile lingered a little too long. Rachel didn't know what it was leading to, or if it was meant to last. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived there looking for silence. The storm had passed, but the distance between her and Ethan had disappeared with it. Something real had taken its place. And neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. The storm had passed, but something inside Rachel had changed. The air around the farmhouse felt different now, lighter, but charged with quiet tension. Every morning when she walked into the kitchen and found Ethan already making coffee, her heart gave a small, uncontrollable jump. She told herself it was just comfort, just gratitude. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Ethan seemed different too. He was still quiet and composed, but now he smiled more, talked a little longer. And his eyes often lingered on her without meaning to. They both pretended not to notice. They moved around each other like two people afraid of stepping too close. afraid that one small spark would start something neither of them was ready for. Days slipped by in soft, sunlit moments. Rachel painted again for the first time in months, setting up her easel by the big window in the living room. She painted the countryside, the golden fields, the rust-red barn, the endless sky. Ethan would pass by, glance at her work, and offer simple words that meant more than he realized. "That's really good," he'd say, his voice calm but genuine. Rachel would smile. "You think so?" "I know so." Sometimes he'd stay a little longer, watching her paint in silence. She could feel his presence behind her, steady, grounding, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Ethan invited her to the lake nearby. The weather was warm, the sky a soft blue. They packed sandwiches and walked the narrow trail through the trees. Rachel hadn't done something this simple in a long time. No deadlines, no phone buzzing, no pressure. Just air, sunlight, and a quiet man walking beside her. When they reached the lake, the water shimmered under the sun. Ethan skipped a stone across the surface with practiced ease. Rachel laughed as hers sank immediately. "You make it look so easy," she said. "Everything's easy once you stop trying too hard," he replied. They sat on the old wooden pier, feet dangling above the water, their shoulders almost touching. A light breeze brushed against them. For a moment there was no noise, just the sound of water gently lapping against the shore. Rachel spoke first, her voice soft. "You ever wish you could freeze a moment? Just keep it from ending." Ethan looked at her for a long second before answering. "Every time I'm with you." Her heart stopped. The words were simple, almost casual, but the meaning behind them was anything but. She turned to look at him. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was serious, honest, open. "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head slightly, almost as if he regretted saying it out loud. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," he said. "It's just, sometimes you meet someone who reminds you what it feels like to be alive again." Rachel didn't know what to say. She looked down at the water, blinking fast. For months, she'd built walls around herself, telling herself she wasn't ready. That love wasn't safe anymore. But now, with him sitting beside her, she could feel those walls slowly breaking apart. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy with things unsaid. Then a car horn sounded in the distance, echoing faintly through the trees. Ethan turned his head, frowning slightly. "Your aunt," he said. "They must be back early." The words hit her like cold water. For a moment, she had forgotten about the rest of the world, the family. The expectations, everything outside this peaceful bubble. Now reality was rushing back fast. They walked back to the house in silence. Rachel's heart raced the entire way. Part of her wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the right words never came. When they reached the driveway, her aunt's car was already there, doors open, voices filling the air. Her aunt greeted her with warmth and chatter, asking about meals, chores, everything she'd missed. Rachel forced a smile, answering politely, pretending nothing had changed. Ethan greeted them too, polite and composed. But his eyes met Rachel's for just a second, and that look said everything. That evening, the house was full. Again, noise, laughter, the clatter of dishes. It should have felt normal, but Rachel couldn't shake the emptiness pressing on her chest. The easy peace she'd shared with Ethan was gone, replaced by distance and unspoken words. After dinner, she stepped outside for air. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Ethan approaching. He looked unsure, as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure he should. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just getting used to the noise again." He nodded. "It's different, huh?" "Yeah," she said softly. It was quieter before. They stood there side by side, neither knowing how to bridge the space between them. The silence stretched. Rachel wanted to tell him how much those quiet days had meant to her, how he had made her feel safe, how being with him had changed her, but the words stuck. Instead, she said, "Thank you. For the past 2 weeks. It meant a lot." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It meant something to me, too." Her heart skipped. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, then stopped himself. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. "You'll need it for the trip home." She nodded, though she wasn't ready to think about leaving. "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Rachel." That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Every look, every word replayed in her head. She knew what was happening. She was falling for him, but she also knew it wasn't simple. He belonged to this quiet world, and she belonged to another. Maybe what they shared could only exist here, in this small slice of time between storms and silence. The next day, things went on as if nothing had happened. Her aunt talked about upcoming plans. Ethan fixed a fence, and Rachel tried to keep herself busy. But whenever their eyes met, it was there that invisible pull. That unspoken truth. Late in the afternoon, Rachel found him by the barn working on a gate hinge. She wanted to say goodbye properly, to tell him how much he had changed her without even trying. But when he turned and smiled at her, she froze. The words she had practiced in her mind vanished. He noticed the look on her face and gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say it," he said softly. "I already know." Rachel swallowed hard, nodding. "Still, thank you. For what?" "For reminding me what real peace feels like." He nodded once, his eyes gentle. "Take it with you." As she walked back to the house, the sun dipped low behind the hills, and the fields glowed gold one last time. She didn't look back, but she felt his gaze following her, steady, quiet. Just like him, something between them had begun and ended in silence, but it didn't feel unfinished. It felt real, honest, and unforgettable. Rachel knew that life would move on, but the memory of that summer, the laughter, the storm, the lake, and the unspoken confession would stay with her. Because sometimes the strongest emotions are the ones that never need to be spoken out loud. Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, marking Rachel's last day at the farmhouse. The air carried the faint scent of wet grass and coffee brewing in the kitchen. Everything looked peaceful, yet inside her chest there was a quiet ache she couldn't ignore. Her aunt was cheerful, making plans for the day, while Ethan was already outside, working as if nothing had changed. But for Rachel, everything had. She had spent 2 weeks living in stillness, surrounded by fields and open sky. And somehow, in that quiet, she had found something rare, someone who understood her without words. Now, as she packed her bag, each folded shirt felt heavier than it should. She wasn't just packing clothes. She was packing memories she didn't want to leave behind. After breakfast, her aunt announced she had errands in town and would be gone most of the day. Rachel nodded absently, pretending to listen, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She wondered if Ethan would say anything before she left, if he'd mention what had grown between them, or if he'd let it fade into silence. Outside, the sun shone over the fields, warm and bright. Rachel found Ethan by the fence, fixing a broken post. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm, unreadable. "Leaving tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, early morning." A brief silence followed. "Guess you'll be glad to be back in the city," he said lightly. Rachel tried to smile. "Maybe, but it won't feel the same now." Paused, studying her for a moment. "You'll be fine. You've got that look again." "What look?" she asked. "The one people get when they finally figure out who they are." His words hit deeper than he probably meant. Rachel looked at him, trying to memorize the quiet strength in his face, the steady kindness that had made her feel safe. "You always say the right things, don't you?" she said softly. He chuckled. "Not always. Just when it matters." They stood in silence, the wind moving gently through the tall grass. Rachel wanted to say something real, something lasting, but the words wouldn't come. Everything felt too fragile, like one wrong word would break the spell of what they had shared. Later that afternoon, her aunt returned with groceries, filling the kitchen with noise again. Rachel helped unpack while Ethan disappeared to the barn. The easy rhythm of their days together was gone. There were too many people now, too much chatter. She missed the quiet where her thoughts could breathe. As the sun began to set, Rachel slipped away from the house. She found Ethan standing by the back fence, looking toward the horizon. The sky was painted in deep orange and purple, the fields glowing under the fading light. She stopped a few steps away, unsure how to begin. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said finally. He didn't turn right away. "I figured you might." Rachel swallowed hard. "I don't really know what to say." "You don't have to," he said, still watching the sunset. Some things don't need words, but she wanted to say something. She couldn't just leave it like this. She stepped closer. "Ethan, these 2 weeks, they meant more to me than you think. You helped me remember what it feels like to be alive again. I don't think I can ever forget that." Okay, now he turned, eyes soft but steady. "I won't forget either." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain from far away. The air between them felt heavy with everything left unsaid, every glance, every almost confession, every quiet moment that had meant too much. Rachel smiled faintly, though her throat ached. "So this is it then?" He nodded slowly. "For now, maybe. Life has a way of bringing people back around when it's meant to." She wanted to believe that. "And if it doesn't, then at least we got this," he said. "Something good? Something real." Her eyes stung, but she held the tears back. She didn't want to ruin the moment with sadness. Instead, she stepped forward and offered her hand. "Goodbye, Ethan." He looked at her hand for a moment, then took it gently. His hand was rough and warm, grounding. "Goodbye, Rachel." Neither moved. The sunset bathed them in gold, and for a heartbeat it felt like time had stopped, like the world had gone still just for them. Then slowly she let go. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The house was quiet again, just like it had been at the start. But the quiet didn't feel empty anymore, felt full of echoes. Every laugh, every late-night talk, every shared silence lived there now. She stood by the window and looked out at the dark fields. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably sitting by the barn or watching the stars. She wondered if he was thinking about her too. When morning came, she dressed quietly and carried her suitcase downstairs. Her aunt was still asleep and Ethan was nowhere to be seen. The thought stung, but she told herself it was for the best. Maybe goodbyes were easier left unspoken. She stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against her face. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the sun was just beginning to rise. Then, from behind the barn, she heard footsteps. Ethan appeared carrying a mug of coffee. He walked up to her, calm and steady as always. "Didn't think you'd leave without saying bye," he said. "I thought you'd still be asleep," she replied with a smile. He shook his head. "Didn't sleep much." They stood there in the early light. Two people caught between what was and what could have been. Rachel wanted to say something meaningful, but the moment felt too perfect for words. Ethan finally said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" "I will," she said. "And you?" "I'll be right here. Same place, same view." She smiled, trying to hold herself together. "Maybe I'll come back someday. I'll keep the porch light on just in case." It was simple, but it meant everything. Rachel stepped into the car and rolled down the window. "Goodbye, Ethan." He lifted a hand. "Goodbye, city girl." The engine started and the car began to move down the dirt road. Rachel looked back one last time. Ethan was still standing there, the sunrise glowing behind him, his figure growing smaller as she drove away. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. What they shared didn't need tears at, was something she would carry quietly inside her heart. As the countryside faded into the distance, Rachel realized she wasn't the same person who had arrived 2 weeks ago. She had come here to find peace, but she found something deeper: clarity, hope, and a reminder that love doesn't always need to last forever to matter. Sometimes it's enough that it happened. Back in the city, life resumed. The noise, the rush, the familiar chaos, all of it returned. But when nights grew too loud and her heart felt heavy again, Rachel would close her eyes and remember the farmhouse, the quiet storm, the laughter on the porch, and the man who reminded her that even broken hearts can find warmth again. And though they never said it out loud, both Rachel and Ethan knew some connections never really end. They just live quietly in the spaces between goodbye and forever. The morning began quietly, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful but uncertain. The kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of birds outside. Ethan leaned against the counter, pretending to check something on his phone, though the screen had gone dark minutes ago. He wasn't really doing anything, he was just avoiding looking at Lily. She stood by the stove, stirring her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The smell of toast filled the air. But neither of them ate. They had lived together for 3 years now. Ever since Ethan's father and Lily's mother married. In the beginning, it had been easy new routines, family dinners, polite smiles. They were both old enough to understand the situation, to respect the changes, and to stay out of each other's way. But over time, small things began to shift. Ethan noticed her laughter more than he should have. He noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way she looked at the rain like it was talking to her. And lately, every conversation seemed to carry a weight that neither could explain. That morning, everything felt heavier. The light coming through the window made the air look hazy, almost slow. Ethan's heart was loud in his chest for no reason he could name. Lily finally set her spoon down and sighed. "You okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer right away. She turned, leaning against the counter across from him, her arms crossed. Her eyes were calm but distant. "Some lines," she said quietly, "are harder not to cross than I thought." Ethan blinked. The words didn't sound like a reply to his question, they sounded like a confession. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He just looked at her, confused, caught between curiosity and fear. "What do you mean?" He finally asked, her lips curved into a sad half-smile. "You know what I mean?" she said softly, then looked away. She picked up her coffee again, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I didn't plan it," she continued, her voice almost a whisper. "It just happened. And now it's harder to pretend." The silence that followed felt alive, like the air itself was listening. Ethan's thoughts were racing. He didn't want to assume anything, but every word she said seemed to pull him closer to a truth he'd been avoiding. "Lily," he began carefully, "if this is about something I did," she shook her head quickly. "No, it's not something you did. It's just—" She took a deep breath. "We're supposed to be family now, right? But sometimes I forget." Sometimes it feels like she stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "Never mind," she said finally. Ethan set his mug down and straightened. "You can tell me," he said gently. Lily's eyes met his, and for the first time that morning, he saw something he hadn't expected: vulnerability. Not sadness exactly, but a quiet struggle. She looked like she was holding something fragile inside her, afraid that saying it out loud might break it. "We need to talk," she said, after a long pause. "But not here." The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Not here. That meant she had something serious to say. Something that couldn't be said where anyone could overhear. "Okay," he said simply. Lily gave a small nod, then turned toward the sink. She rinsed her cup, placed it on the rack, and wiped her hands with the towel beside it. "I'm going for a walk," she murmured, still facing away from him. "I'll see you later." She left the kitchen without looking back. Ethan stood there, listening to her footsteps fade up the stairs, the sound of her bedroom door closing softly. The clock ticked on, marking seconds that felt longer than they should. He looked around the kitchen, noticing the small details: her sketchbook lying near the fruit bowl, a pencil resting across its open pages, a half-finished drawing of the backyard in early morning light. He picked it up carefully and stared at it. The scene was peaceful, but there were 2 figures standing by the kitchen window, drawn faintly, almost hidden in the shading. One of them looked like her. The other looked like him. Ethan's chest tightened. He placed the sketchbook back where he found it, his fingers lingering on the cover for a moment. He wasn't sure what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But something inside him whispered that this morning wasn't the same as all the others. He sat down at the table, his coffee untouched. The sunlight shifted, sliding slowly across the surface. He thought about the last few weeks, their late-night talks about school, about dreams, about how strange it was to suddenly share a family. He remembered the time she fell asleep on the couch during a movie, and he'd covered her with a blanket, careful not to wake her. He remembered the way she smiled when she caught him doing it the next morning. It had all felt innocent then, but now he wasn't sure anymore. Maybe she was just confused. Maybe she didn't mean what he thought she meant. He told himself that over and over, trying to steady the rush in his chest. But then he remembered her voice, soft and certain. "Some lines are harder not to cross than I thought." Ethan rubbed his forehead, unsure what to feel. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even shocked. He was just lost. Later, he heard her door open upstairs. For a moment, he thought she might come back down, that they might finally talk. But instead, she walked past his room without a word, heading outside. Through the window, he saw her cross the yard, hair shining in the sunlight, sketchbook in her hands. She sat under the old maple tree and began to draw again, her shoulders hunched slightly forward. Her focus intense. Ethan watched her for a while, unsure if he should go out there. He wanted to ask what she meant. He wanted to understand. But he also feared what the answer might be. So he stayed by the window, quietly watching the girl who was both his family and something far more complicated. That morning, everything ordinary suddenly felt different. The same house, same kitchen, same to people. Yet nothing was the same anymore. A single sentence had changed everything. The boundaries that once felt so clear had blurred. And though neither of them had truly crossed them yet, they both knew the line was there, thin, fragile, and dangerously close. Ethan didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain. The silence that had filled their kitchen that morning wasn't just quiet anymore. It was full of questions, full of feelings they couldn't name, and full of the uncertain promise that nothing between them would ever be simple again. And as he stood there, alone in the soft morning light, Ethan realized that sometimes it's not the things people say that change everything, it's the things they almost say. The rain started in the evening, soft and steady, wrapping the house in a calm, distant rhythm. Ethan sat at the dining table, pretending to read while his thoughts circled the same thing, Lily's words from that morning. Some lines are harder not to cross. He couldn't stop hearing them. Every time the thunder rolled outside, he remembered her voice, quiet but sure. He had barely seen her all day. After the morning conversation, she went out for hours. Now, as the rain tapped the windows, he heard her footsteps returning. She came in quietly, her hair damp, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You waited," she said softly. "I thought we should talk," Ethan replied. His voice was steady, but his heart wasn't. Lily nodded and set her sketchbook on the table. "I didn't mean to make things weird," she said, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "It's just, I can't keep pretending nothing's changed." Ethan swallowed hard. Changed how? Her eyes lifted to his, and he saw something fragile. There's something honest. "You know," she whispered, "we're not just strangers sharing a house anymore. I don't even know when it started. But I look at you," and she stopped, shaking her head. "It feels wrong to feel this way, but it's real." Ethan stood still, unsure how to breathe. For a moment, he wanted to deny it, to say she was confused. But deep down, he knew she wasn't alone in this. He'd been feeling the same pull, quiet but persistent. He thought it was something he could control. "He was wrong, Lily," he said carefully. "We can't just act like this doesn't matter. You're my family now." "I know," she said quickly, "and that's why it hurts. I don't want to ruin anything. But sometimes when we talk, or when you smile, it feels like I've already crossed a line just by feeling something I shouldn't." Her honesty disarmed him. He walked to the counter, turning his back for a moment to collect himself. "We can't change what we feel," he said slowly, "but maybe we can control what we do." Lily gave a sad laugh. "That's the problem. Feelings don't care about control." Ethan turned back. "Then what are you saying?" She met his eyes and said the words he'd feared and wanted at the same time. "I'm saying I care about you more than I should." The air between them tightened. Outside, lightning flashed, and for a brief second, the room filled with white light before sinking back into the soft glow of the lamps. Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. He saw her trembling slightly, and he knew this wasn't easy for her either. "Do you regret saying that?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I regret hiding it for so long." The words hung there, heavy and honest. Neither of them spoke. The rain grew louder, hitting the roof in waves. Ethan could feel his pulse in his hands. He wanted to say something that made sense, something mature, something that could fix this. But everything felt too big for words. Finally, he said, maybe we're just lonely. Maybe this house makes it easy to confuse things. Lily smiled faintly, almost sadly. You really think that's what this is? He wanted to say yes, but he couldn't. I don't know. Lily took a small step closer. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. I just needed you to know. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. Ethan saw every emotion she was trying to hide. Fear, guilt, longing, hope. It was all there. He realized this wasn't a passing feeling. It wasn't confusion. It was something deeper that neither of them had chosen. Lily, he said softly, I don't want to hurt anyone, especially not you. She nodded, brushing away a tear quickly. You're not hurting me, she said. You're just being honest. And that's enough. They stood there only a few feet apart, the silence growing softer, warmer. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background. Ethan could hear her breathing, see the way her hands trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear again. Every part of him wanted to close the space between them, but his mind reminded him of the boundaries that held them apart. Maybe this isn't about right or wrong, Lily said after a long pause. Maybe it's about what we do with the feelings we can't control. He nodded. Maybe. She smiled, a quiet, broken smile that still somehow felt beautiful. I wish I'd met you in another way, she whispered. Then maybe we wouldn't have to pretend. Ethan felt something inside him tighten at her words. He wanted to tell her he wished the same, that if the world had written their story differently, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. But instead, he said nothing, because saying anything would make it real. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The world outside continued, the rain washing over the streets, thunder rolling somewhere far away. It was just the two of them standing in a kitchen filled with things unsaid. Finally, Lily stepped back. I should go, she said quietly. It's late. Ethan nodded, watching her turn toward the doorway. But before she left, she stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, she said softly, you make this house feel like home. The words hit him harder than he expected. When she disappeared down the hallway, the room felt empty again, but in a different way than before. It wasn't just silence. Now it was the space left behind after something honest had been spoken. Ethan sat down, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how to face her at breakfast. He just knew that everything had changed. He thought about how love could appear in places it wasn't supposed to. It didn't ask permission, didn't care about rules or timing. It simply arrived, quiet and complicated, leaving people to figure out what to do with it. That night, long after the rain stopped, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The echo of her voice stayed in his mind, soft, uncertain, but true. He knew they had crossed no visible line, yet emotionally something irreversible had happened. It wasn't passion or impulse, it was connection. Something that had been building quietly through late-night talks, small acts of kindness, and shared silences. He finally closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this moment would stay with him. Not because it was forbidden, but because it was real. And as the storm outside faded into calm, Ethan understood that sometimes the heart doesn't need permission to feel, it just needs the courage to accept what it already knows. The next morning came with quiet sunshine, bright but cool after the storm. The smell of fresh rain still lingered in the air, and the house was unusually still. Ethan woke early, hoping the calm day might wash away the confusion from the night before. But deep down, he knew things weren't the same. The words Lily had spoken soft, trembling. Honest had changed everything between them. He walked downstairs, half expecting her to be gone, but she was already in the kitchen. She stood by the counter in an oversized sweater, hair slightly messy, holding a cup of tea. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled faintly, though her eyes carried the same uncertainty he felt inside. "Morning," Ethan said, trying to sound normal. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her fingers tapped the mug nervously. They stood in silence for a while, the sound of the kettle filling the air. It wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was quieter, gentler, as if both were afraid to disturb something fragile. Finally, Lily spoke. "I didn't sleep much," she said. "Me neither," Ethan admitted. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter opposite her. "I kept thinking about what you said." Lily's eyes dropped to her tea. "I shouldn't have said it," she murmured. "I don't want things to be strange between us." "They already are," he said softly. "But maybe that's okay." She looked up, confused. "Okay." He nodded. "We can't just erase how we feel. Maybe the only way forward is to be honest about it." For a long moment, Lily didn't move. Then she let out a slow breath and said, "Honest, huh?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Then, honestly, Ethan, I don't know how to stop caring about you." The words hit him like a heartbeat he'd been trying to ignore. He took a step forward before catching himself. "Lily," he said quietly, "you know, we can't, I know." She interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. "I know exactly what we can't do. But I can't change what I feel either." She set her mug down and rubbed her hands together. "Last night I told myself I'd wake up and pretend everything was normal," she continued. "But pretending feels worse than being honest." Ethan stared at her, unable to speak. She wasn't asking for anything, she was just telling the truth. And somehow, that made it harder. He took a small step closer. "You're not alone in this," he said finally. Lily's breath caught. "You mean," he nodded, "I feel it too. I've tried to ignore it, but it's there, and I don't know what to do with it." The room went quiet again. They both knew what this meant, yet neither moved. The morning light spilled through the window, soft and golden, painting the kitchen in a calm glow. For a second, it didn't feel wrong. It just felt human. Lily's voice broke the silence. "Maybe feelings aren't the problem," she said quietly. "Maybe fear is—" Ethan's chest tightened. "Fear of what?" "Of crossing a line we can't come back from," she said. He nodded slowly, understanding her better than she probably realized. They both knew that one wrong step could change everything. But what if the boundary wasn't meant to be a wall, but a reminder to be careful not to stop feeling? Before he could respond, she reached across the counter. Her fingers brushed his hand, just a small, trembling touch, but it felt like the air shifted. He didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and neither of them spoke. The touch wasn't bold or reckless. It was quiet, uncertain, and real. "Lily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, though she didn't move her hand. "I just needed to know it wasn't all in my head." Ethan turned his hand, gently closing his fingers around hers. "It's not," he said. That was all it took. A single, fragile moment that said everything words couldn't. They stood there for a while. Not as step-siblings, not as people caught in rules, but as two hearts that finally stopped pretending. The sound of the clock ticked softly in the background, and the morning breeze moved the curtains like a slow dance. Eventually, Ethan pulled his hand back, not out of rejection, but because he knew if he didn't, they might both forget where they were. "We should probably talk about what this means," he said. Lily nodded, her eyes still on him. "I know." He smiled faintly. "You crossed the line you were talking about," he said, trying to lighten the moment. She gave a small laugh, the kind that came with relief. "Yeah," she said, "and it wasn't as terrifying as I thought." "Okay." "But it was real," Ethan added. She nodded again. "It was." For a while, they just stood there, both knowing that something irreversible had just happened. They hadn't done anything wrong, they hadn't said anything inappropriate, but their hearts had taken a step forward that logic couldn't undo. Lily broke the silence first. "You ever think maybe feelings like this happen for a reason?" Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Maybe," she said slowly, "we're supposed to learn something from them. Not to act on them, but to understand them. To understand ourselves." Ethan thought about that, then nodded. Maybe love isn't always about staying together. Sometimes it's about realizing you can care deeply for someone and still know when to stop. Lily smiled sadly. "That sounds like something you'd say." He chuckled softly. It's something I had to believe. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The clouds began to clear and sunlight filled the kitchen, brighter this time. Lily looked out the window, then turned back to him. "I'm glad we talked," she said. "Me too," Ethan replied, "even if it makes things complicated." "Life's already complicated," she said with a small shrug. "We just finally admitted it." They both laughed quietly, easing the tension that had been building for so long. For the first time in days, they felt lighter. After breakfast, Lily picked up her sketchbook. "I'm going for a walk," she said. "Need to think." Ethan nodded. "Be careful." "I will," she said, pausing at the doorway. "Ethan." "Yeah?" She smiled softly. "Thanks for not pretending." He nodded, watching her leave. The front door closed and the house fell silent again, but not the same silence as before. This one felt peaceful, almost healing. Ethan sat at the table, his coffee now cold again, and looked around the kitchen. The space where they had stood just moments ago felt warm, filled with a quiet memory he'd never forget. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: the boundary between them had shifted. Not broken in a harmful way, but gently redrawn into something honest, complicated, and real. As the light brightened and the world outside woke up, Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe crossing a line wasn't always about doing something wrong. Sometimes it was about learning the truth of what lived quietly in your heart. And in that simple morning, in a kitchen filled with warmth and uncertainty, Ethan finally understood that love isn't always a story of possession. It's often a lesson in restraint, honesty, and courage. Days passed after that morning, each one quiet but charged with unspoken emotions. Ethan and Lily both acted normal, but their eyes told a different story. Every glance, every pause in conversation carried something unsaid. The memory of that morning, the brief touch, the honesty between them lingered like a shadow neither could shake. Ethan threw himself into work, hoping the routine would help him clear his head. He stayed longer at the office, returning home when it was dark. Lily noticed but didn't mention it. She spent her days painting and going on long walks, her sketchbook always in hand. But even as they drifted into their routines, the connection between them remained a quiet, invisible thread that pulled at both of them. One evening, Ethan came home late to find Lily asleep on the couch. Her sketchbook lay open on the table beside her, filled with drawings of the rain, trees, and small moments from the house. But one page stopped him cold. It was a drawing of two hands, his and hers touching gently across a counter. The same moment they had shared that morning. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the book. He didn't want to wake her, but something in his chest ached. He covered her with a blanket and went upstairs, unable to shake the thought that she felt just as lost as he did. The next morning, Lily found her sketchbook closed with the blanket still around her shoulders. She knew Ethan had seen it. For a moment, she considered pretending she didn't care, but then she smiled faintly. Maybe it was better that he knew. Later that day, Ethan came down for breakfast. Lily was already there, making toast. "You saw the drawing, didn't you?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Do you hate me for it?" she asked, half smiling, half scared. He shook his head. "No, it was honest. Like everything else we said that day." She looked relieved. "I didn't mean to make things harder." "You didn't," he said. "You just reminded me that some moments stay no matter what we do." They ate quietly after that. The silence wasn't awkward anymore, just gentle, like two people who had finally accepted what they couldn't change. As weeks went by, their bond changed shape. They no longer avoided each other, but they also didn't linger too long in shared spaces. They talked about normal things, work, art, food, but behind every word was a sense of care. Lily sometimes caught herself wanting to say more, to confess that she still thought about that morning, but she never did. Ethan sometimes looked at her and wondered what might have been if they weren't bound by the past. By the titles that kept them apart. One weekend, Lily decided to move out for a while. "I think I need space," she told him. Ethan froze. "Space?" She nodded. "Not because of you, because of me. I need to figure out what I want, without confusing it with this." He understood, even though it hurt. "How long?" I don't know, she said honestly, but I think it's the right thing to do. Ethan helped her pack. Neither said much, but both knew the silence was filled with emotion. When the car was ready, she stood by the door looking uncertain. Ethan, she said quietly, I don't want you to think I'm running away. I know, he said. You're just choosing to breathe. She smiled sadly. Yeah, maybe that's it. Before she left, she gave him her sketchbook. Keep it safe for me, she said. I'll want it back one day. He took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. You'll always have a place here, he said softly. Then she left. The sound of the car fading down the street was like a chapter closing. The house felt different, emptier, quieter, but not cold. It felt like a pause. In the days that followed, Ethan missed her deeply. He often opened her sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with light, color, and emotion. Each drawing told a story, one of quiet mornings, laughter, storms, and unspoken affection. It reminded him that what they had shared wasn't something to hide or regret. It was simply human. Months passed. Ethan grew busier, but he never stopped thinking about her. One afternoon, while sorting mail, he found a small envelope addressed in Lily's handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a postcard, a sketch of the ocean, calm and endless. On the back, she'd written only a few words. Finding peace. Hope you are too. He smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. She didn't need to say more. The message was clear. She was okay, healing, maybe even happy. Time moved on. Seasons changed. Ethan learned to live with quiet again. Yet sometimes, late at night, he'd look at the sketchbook and remember the way she had smiled that morning after the storm. He realized that love doesn't always mean staying close. Sometimes it means letting someone go, trusting that the bond remains even at a distance. Then, one spring morning, she came back. He found her standing at the door, holding her suitcase and smiling nervously. I didn't know if you'd still be here, she said. I never left, he replied. Lily stepped inside, looking around the house that had once been filled with their quiet moments. It feels smaller, she said softly. Or maybe we've grown, Ethan said. They sat down with tea just like before. This time there was no heavy silence, no confusion. Only peace. She told him about the small town she'd been staying in, the people she met, the things she'd learned. I think I finally understand, she said. What we had, it wasn't wrong. It was just meant to teach us something. Ethan nodded. To love carefully. To love honestly, she corrected with a gentle smile. He smiled too. And now? Now, she said, we can just be. They spent the day talking, laughing, remembering the little things. The air between them was clear, the weight of the past gone. They didn't need to define their bond anymore. It wasn't about labels or rules. It was about understanding. As the sun set, Lily looked at him and said, You kept my sketchbook safe. He handed it to her with a smile. Always. She flipped through it, seeing her old drawings with fresh eyes. Funny, she said. These used to feel like memories I wanted to escape. Now they just feel like part of who I am. Ethan nodded. They're beautiful because they're real. She looked up at him, smiling warmly. We're both real now. I didn't need to say anything more. The silence that followed was calm and full, not of tension, but of peace. The kind that comes after storms, after honesty, after growth. That night, as Lily unpacked her things again, Ethan looked out the window. The world outside was quiet and full of light. He realized that love, in its purest form, isn't about holding on. It's about understanding when to stay, when to step back, and when to simply be grateful. And in that stillness, surrounded by memories, honesty, and forgiveness, Ethan finally felt something he hadn't in a long time: complete peace.